very, very difficult for families and homeowners to come to evening meetings. And we're constantly, not anymore, but we're organizing people to take time out of their lives to do this. There must be a way of having things more neighborhood-centered. That's the first question. The second question is, what will happen if a project is proposed that ignores the new zoning rules? What protections do we really have so we don't have to reinvent the wheel every time a developer decides to build in the West Berkeley?
I would like to say that the new R1A standards are being applied. They were applied to 2119 8th Street, where she had to completely redo the backyard house from 3 to 2. It was a great win. And 2129 9th Street has come in under the new ones, and so I think they're being applied.
So I could start, and Timothy can also jump in. So I just want to first acknowledge all the work that Tony and Ed and the Friends in R1A did. We wouldn't have this ordinance passed if it wasn't for your work, and you know I feel with a much stronger version. But you have to get 5 votes at City Council, and some people that we thought would be on our side were not on our side. And so I think what we have is a good starting point, and I agree with you that we should look at applying some of those same standards for R2, because I'd like to talk to you about that after this meeting. But really, I think this is an example of neighborhood organizing and the power that neighbors can have in actually impacting the legislative process. So I just want to commend you for your work. So I just have a few thoughts about some of your issues. Before I do that, on the San Pablo Avenue plan, there have been several referrals over the last 10 years to have a San Pablo area plan. And we know there's a lot of development that's happening along that corridor, and a lot of these properties directly abut residential neighborhoods. And so we need to think about how we design those projects so that we can have transit-oriented development on San Pablo, but it's contextual, rather than not having clear standards. So we're in the Adler corridor process now. I think after that process is completed, I think it's a good time to have a conversation around applying for the grant money from the Metropolitan Transportation Commission, so we can actually have the resources to do this process. I don't know if you want to talk about the issues around the community input review process.
Sure. First, I just wanted to echo the mayor's thoughts on your participation in that process. That was grueling. I mean, you guys probably went to, I don't know how many meetings you went to, but it was a lot. And you weren't the only ones. And that's not the only issue for which people come out to meetings. I mean, I have to be at the council meetings. I have to be at commission meetings. You don't have to be there, and you're there anyway. So I really appreciate that, because that takes a lot of dedication. And I really hear you in terms of how do we make sure that we take public input into account. So clearly there's a set of commission meetings where these projects are decided, right? We've got the ZAB, we've got the Planning Commission, we've got lots of other commissions. And that's the main forum, as well as city council meetings. And those are obviously public meetings, but you're right. I mean, how many people can actually come to an evening public meeting? It's probably a minority of our community. I don't know the answer to how to change that and make that better, but I would say that things like this help, right? So we're all here today, here together having a dialogue. I myself am very happy to do this on a more regular basis, come to neighborhood association meetings, BNC meetings, and have that conversation. And over time, have a dialogue that over time informs the community process, right? So I think that could help. That's one of the ideas I have that could help, and I'm very open to that. And I hear you. There has to be other opportunities for people to participate. And again, this speaks to that tension between levels of discretion and providing consistency for people that are applying for permits, so that there's some predictability in the process that enables investment in development, which we want more housing in Berkeley, and the ability for people to participate in that process. And there's got to be a balance in there somewhere, and maybe we're not balanced right now. We need to think about that a little bit more. But you have to balance those two things.
I have an idea, and that is that when there is a project in a neighborhood, hold the meetings in the neighborhood. The city's got parks throughout Berkeley. There's fire departments throughout Berkeley. Hold the meeting there, publicize it, so people can walk to the meeting. If the development is happening in their area, just make that a policy.
Okay, thank you. Shirley, who's next?
Can I say something from a ZAB point of view? Now, ZAB, of course, doesn't create the zoning or the permitting. To some degree, we can interpret where there's ambiguity, and there's a lot of inconsistency in our zoning, so there is some ambiguity. We implement. But from my point of view, and I can name 3 or 4 other ZAB members, probably, we really look forward to insightful public comment. Somebody that draws attention to something and possibly has a solution to something. We're always negotiating with the applicant, always. So come to it, if you have an issue, come to the ZAB meeting. You're not going to get everything you want, but you can negotiate and find middle ground. That often happens at ZAB, in my experience.
I'm talking about before it gets to the
I know, I understand that.
Okay.
And I'm speaking
Hi.
from a ZAB perspective, so
Hi.
that's all I can speak to.
We're going to move to Noah.
Hi, could we demo this just slightly? So we can look at this map from the fire department picture. I'm not going to start off really talking about the map directly. I'll introduce myself. Noah Sudarsky. I was the principal organizer of the Berkeley Hills Watershed Coalition. I have to speak from here because I have a few visuals. If
Do you
anybody
want the
can hear me,
mic to go? Do you want the mic?
let me know. Will it reach me?
It's turned off, so turn it on.
front,
Okay.
at the back.
So.
Turn it on until.
Thank you. So, I'm not going to have the time today to give a breakdown of the issues. There were about 8 or 9 that mobilized a lot of our community against a multi-house development on Shasta Road. And in fact, I'll only really be broaching the issue of fire safety. But first, and listening to everybody this morning only reinforces this, I want to make the case that there's a paradigm shift that is somewhat needed here. The reason I need to do that is following ambitious planners, urban planners, and developers are the victims of a consort of selfish interests. NIMBYs who don't want to be inconvenienced, neighbors who don't want more people in cars crowding their streets, and an array of local zoning laws and red tape that make the job of building buildings a Calvary. Developers are martyrs to the housing crisis cause, and communities who oppose development are the selfish interest group. This is tongue-in-cheek somewhat, but in a nutshell, it's the ideological underpinning that informs all of these debates. It's the subtext. And in order to combat that preconception, I'd like to introduce briefly the Center for Environmental Structure, which is a plaintiff in the matter of this 3-story development that sits on a USGS designated slide zone that is also a high-risk fire area surrounded by protected live oaks. CS has overseen or constructed over 100 buildings. These include San Jose Celebrated Homeless Shelter, the Julian Street Inn, a multi-service center in the Bronx, college campuses in Oregon and Japan, big residential buildings, subdivisions, and dozens of single-family residences. CS is currently building projects in the UK, Naples, and Poland, and CS-inspired projects are being designed all over the world by socially responsible architects. We work with disenfranchised communities and First Nations people. CS was the runner-up in the Bay Bridge competition. In a sense, that's a good metaphor. CS wants to build bridges. CS is not anti-development, but believes that communities must be given the tools to reclaim the built environment and that the developer-driven business model has been broken for a while. So the ideas and practices that define CS since 1967 gave us things like Habitat for Humanity, the new urbanist movement, and it was the entity that defined the anti-modernist, anti-brutalist, anti-Le Corbusier model of top-down, ego-driven architecture. CS gave the world environmental design. It all started right here in Berkeley. But even in Berkeley, developers and their proponents are conflating the housing crisis, that is the need for more affordable human-scale buildings that can help communities thrive, with their desire to build ever more highly profitable developments for the wealthy. And in the case of the disputed Shasta Road development, this means 3 clustered condominium-like structures totaling over 15 bedrooms. CS and the Berkeley Hills Watershed Coalition believe these quasi-mini dorms will impact the fabric and potentially the safety of the community in multiple ways. We would support 2 houses, which is what the developer said he was going to build originally, on this historical tennis court area, with adequate community feedback, the mandated amount of usable open space, and the code mandated setbacks that would allow for the effective deployment of first responders. But who really cares what CS wants? The build first ideology that is rampant in our planning department has effectively laid waste to the idea of an incremental community-driven process. The obstacles facing any kind of organized local opposition these days are quite despairing. No one wants to go to court and pay a fortune in legal fees, but what choice do we have when legitimate grievances are ignored and we've exhausted all administrative remedies? Our elected officials are dismissive of the idea that some projects may in fact be detrimental. With the current local administration, this sad state of affairs is, I believe, changing, but it's going to be a long slog. We've all been disempowered. Developers use expediters with close links to local planning divisions to push their projects, and friendly politicians receive tens of thousands of dollars in soft funds from the National Association of Realtors. Even when the problems are egregious, even when a project violates local building codes, ZAB will take the developer's assurances at face value. We've witnessed this. In this particular case, ZAB said it had no purview to fire safety. It lacked a mandate for that. But municipalities and their urban planning entities, according to California statutes, and I can read the statute if anybody wants me to, have a specific responsibility to ensure public safety. The contradiction needs to be resolved. I've spoken to a number of firefighters, the rank and file, who don't use stories. A ladder truck will never be able to crawl up a 30-degree grade to reach this development. Here's the hitch. Fire departments don't veto projects that have already been through the permitting phase. In short, city planners and staffers need to stop ignoring the safety implications of further development on narrow streets and high-risk areas. And interagency cooperation should be required from the get-go. Now, the question of how and under what condition a site can or cannot be accessed by first responders must be addressed by ZAB prior to the issuance of use permits. To say that this has to be done at a later phase, behind closed doors, is a betrayal of public trust. Now, we're not calling for some kind of protected pastoral refuge in the hills. No one says you can't build. If you look at the history of CS, it's pretty obvious that we like to build. But look at this map. All of these streets that are highlighted in red are, 1 minute, okay. Sorry. Now where was I?
Highlighted red.
Less than 22 feet wide.
Yes, well, they're less than 26, they're between 12 and 26 feet wide. They're difficult for fire engines to navigate. Now, when you look at this map, and you look at the fact that this geographically encompasses almost the entire Berkeley Hills, and if you see the green area at the back, that is actually where the 1923 fire swept through the hills. I seem to experience a sense of cognitive dissonance when I look at that map, and then I look at a project that looks like this, okay? So, I realize that implementing the kind of community-driven, user-centric development that CS pioneered is not Berkeley policy. Planners do rule the roost, they define the terms of the debate, and those are the terms council members will hear as communities try to fight back. Awkwardly, usually. Now, until developers decide that they can do better, that they can actually engage with the community to elaborate the projects they want, that's the paradigm we're stuck with. However, Berkeley can still decide that reasonable alternatives are possible. Alternatives that would diffuse community opposition and allow developers to build much more quickly. Environmentally sensitive, I'm almost done. Residential zoning limits are already in effect on Panoramic Way. The conditions on Panoramic, steep, winding, narrow streets that are challenging for heavy equipment and first responders are prevalent in many other parts of the hills, as the map of the fire department map makes clear. So my question is, why does Panoramic have its own specific zoning code, but the rest of the hills do not? Why can't Berkeley at least consider extending ESR zoning to a wide swath of the hills, those areas where access is always challenging, where streets are narrow, steep, and winding, and where the type of development that may be appropriate elsewhere is not a good fit? Expanding ESR zoning for the hills would be a win-win situation for all concerned. One less story, won't make the incentive to build disappear. So why can't Berkeley at least consider expanding ESR? Thank you.
Does anyone want to answer that?
Well, we met along with Mayor Dean, and I think conditions in some of these very narrow streets, and we drove around, we looked at some of the streets in the hills, are very unique from other parts of Berkeley, within the flatlands, the commercial districts with the wider streets. So I think we do need to look at special conditions in some of the hill areas to make sure that there's proper egress. And certainly one of the considerations of Panoramic Hill was putting more density in the area where there's only one way in and one way out just was not a smart idea. And so they're certainly very open to talking with any neighbors who are interested, looking at what kinds of regulations are appropriate for some of these very narrow hill streets.
I would like to just take the liberty to make one additional comment. If you will remember George Cleve, he was a orchestra conductor, was killed in the Berkeley Hills about a block from this proposed.
He wasn't killed, it was the woman who's...
Oh, well, it was somebody associated with him anyway. When the fire department could not reach them, and it's a block about from where this project is proposed. Just a matter, and thank you for correcting me.
We did have some.
Okay, we'll go to Phil.
Hi, I'm Phil Backaway, and I serve on the Claremont-Elmwood Neighborhood Association Board, and I'm also the co-convener of the Southside Neighborhood Consortium, which is about 6 of the neighborhood associations that are on Southside. I'm going to turn my timer on. Sorry. Okay, so we formed the Southside Neighborhood Consortium kind of by luck. What had happened, and I'm going to use this as a case study for why the city needs to do better. Around about 2004, 2005, we started to see the conversion of many single-family houses on Southside into mini-dorms. And at that point, I approached, I wasn't on the senior board then, I had been, I was off. I approached the planning director, and who was Dan Marks. Well, Dan was the Uber planning director before they split the departments up. And Mark Rhodes reported to him, he was actually the planning director. And they basically told us that, well, the planning department couldn't do anything about mini dorms, and even if they could, they wouldn't. So there began a long, slow political battle to get a handle on these structures that were really causing a tremendous number of negative impacts on the neighborhood.
Well, the microphone closer to you.
Closer? No, that'll be really loud. Oh, okay. So one day I was bicycling down to my yoga class, which I do on Tuesdays and Fridays, down Parker Street, and I saw Ali Islami, who owned 2 or 3 mini dorms in my neighborhood, in front of a house that was under construction. And I went, oh, gee, when I get home, I'm going to Google that address. And what I discovered was that the Lacan neighborhood had been in the process of working to deal with his structure. So several of us further, on Southside got together and contacted Lacan, and we ended up forming the Southside Neighborhood Consortium. And as you know, Jesse, you were on the council, that battle went on for several years over 2133. So, and eventually we got 2 different ordinances passed. But the community did all of the heavy lifting, all of it. Planning department did nothing. Year after year after year, and it was the same 3 or 4 people who had been busy approving mini dorms, saying that they were by right, when in fact several municipal lawyers that we had spoken with said that there was ample support in the planning code to actually turn these down without the legislation. So that's how we got to dealing with the mini dorms. So now the South Side is faced with several things that are happening at the moment. One is that the Derby-Belrose Warren corridor has become pretty much gridlocked all day long. The traffic from the university, the through traffic that Fareed has referenced, and we don't see anybody doing anything about it. The city's not being proactive in managing what those impacts are. And of course, the problem with that corridor will affect should affect the EIR that the developers are doing for the Claremont development, because that's all part of the same traffic flow. The second thing is we now have this proposal by the university to buy putting in a volleyball facility. The city was supposed to have a joint use agreement in place with the university for all the sports facilities up there. Somehow it disappeared. The city's our reading of the requirements is that the city's approval is necessary for the conversion of the existing softball field, which is specifically designated in the covenants as a softball field, to change use. And then finally, we have a consortium of neighbors who've been fundraising and formed a nonprofit to sue the university over the unauthorized enrollment increases. So those are three really big issues that are affecting the quality of life in our neck of the woods. And really, the city bureaucracy has not only been completely absent, but hostile in some cases. So, particularly in the suit against the university, requested numerous meetings with the city manager and the city attorney, and they've done zip. I mean, impossible to get a meeting to discuss that. Similarly with, we have not seen any intervention by the city staff on the Clark Kerr volleyball field proposal as well. So I guess I have two. One is, how do we get the neighborhood involved earlier in the process? So, like with mini dorms, there should have been like a steering committee that was put together to deal with it, and it didn't happen. And the second is, how can we coordinate better? There's often a real attitude among the staff at City Hall that the neighbors are just pests. And unless you get a council member or the mayor to intervene on your behalf, you're very, very unlikely to get a meeting. So those are my two questions I want to leave you with.
I can't speak in too much, those are good questions, and thank you for your comments. I can't speak in too much detail about the particular projects that you mentioned, because I'm just not as close, especially the ones that were going on before I was in this role. But I do want to speak to some of the issues you raised around public participation. And one of the things I want to state first, that there's a theme that's coming up in a lot of the comments about the role of staff versus the role of council, or versus the role of commissions. And one thing I want to make really clear about what our role is, what my role is in planning. And I manage the land use planning division, so that's essentially implements the zoning code, and the building and safety division, which implements the building code, as well as our energy office and our toxics division, right? Our role is not to make the laws that govern how and where construction happens, right? That's not the role of me or my staff. Our role is to implement the laws that are made by our elected officials. So there's a big difference between the role of staff and the role of our mayor and city council. If rules need to get changed, because I think I agree with what you said, which is the zoning ordinance is complex, it's layered, and in some cases it doesn't agree with itself. Right? And so we're taking a lot of steps to improve the zoning ordinance, which has been designed over decades, right? And so we have to make that thing easier to follow and more internally consistent. The role of changing those rules is really set in motion by our mayor and city council. And democracy is difficult and challenging. If you want the rules to get changed, it has to involve the mayor, the council, the commissions. And once those rules are changed, we will implement whatever rules have been adopted by the mayor and city council, right? And so that's a really important distinction for everybody to keep in mind, right? No planning staff is promoting construction, right? That's not our job. Our job is to be independent analysts of comparing an application for construction to what's allowed in the zoning code and what's allowed in the building code. And that's an important role that we play, and I talk to my staff about that a lot. Our independence is very important as analysts within the planning department. So, kind of back to your question, if rules have to change that are affecting the neighborhood, yes, we're going to be involved, but a lot of that work has to be community organizing, and you are very good at that, right? You have a lot of experience in that, and that's how rules change, whether it's at the city level, the county level, the state level, or the national level. That's how rules get changed. It's community organizing.
Well, I guess my issue really is that when the staff wants a rule to change, they make a recommendation to the council. And that rule change is often in opposition to what the neighborhood wants. Similarly, in many things that come before the ZAB, the staff recommendation is favorable despite the fact that there's ample legal precedent to not be in favor of that